Welcome. This is going to be another That's So Ray review, and today we're going to be discussing Hannah and Nick from season 7 of Love is Blind. I'm not going to be going through every single episode, but I'm going to be giving my general thoughts on things that happened within this season thus far. I am not going to do a play-by-play of every episode. I'm just going to be giving my general thoughts about Nick and Hannah and their relationship. So let's start out with Nick. In the pods, everyone was dating one another, and a lot of the women were laughing about Nick, saying that he seemed like he was sort of like a player. They were saying like he was a smooth talker, and they really felt like this was a red flag. But for some reason, Hannah was drawn to it. It really gave me the vibe of like Nick came across as like the cool kid. And maybe Hannah was not used to dating guys who were like the popular kid in school. The way that Nick portrayed himself, he did really portray himself like he was like a popular kid. He said that he was in a minor football league and that he was a kicker. And I think when Hannah heard this, she was imagining this really tall, nicely built guy. And that was attractive to her, especially since I believe she's like 5'9" or 5'10". So she also mentioned too that she was looking for a guy that was a bigger guy as well. Or at least I believe she voiced that she was not into shorter guys because of her height. When it came time to the proposals that were going to happen in the pods, Hannah really had two people that she connected with. Number one was Leo, the art dealer who claimed to be this rich guy, and then Nick. And ultimately, she felt a stronger connection with Nick, despite Leo really trying to push Hannah to stay open to being with him until I think it was like probably like the decision day. Like, even though they don't like explicitly say it on Love is Blind, there's a day that is designated to where they have to either make a proposal or decide that they didn't find a match within the whole experiment. Let's get to the unveiling where they see what one another looks like physically for the first time. There's always this moment before the unveiling where they show confessionals where each of the individuals are interviewed and they talk about how they're feeling about seeing the person that's supposed to be their fiance for the first time. So let's talk about Nick's interview. So during his interview, he is smiling, excited. He says that he loves Hannah because it feels like she has a lot of depth to her. He says that it also seems like it doesn't matter to her what job you have, what status you are, what car you drive, what income you make. And he just talks about how he's made her feel so comfortable in this that she's going to basically love him for who he is. Then we get to Hannah's interview. Hannah really talks a lot about the physical aspect of Nick. So she says, oh, he's Rico Suave. He seems like he's a jock. He's going to be hot. He's charming. And he played football. He works out. And he seems like he has a lot of swag. So again, going back to what I mentioned before, it just seems like she's looking at him like, oh my God, I'm the one getting the popular guy. And not so much as who he is in general. Like, she's really focused on the physical, it seems, here. And then she says the worst case scenario is that he's like super tiny and I could fit him in my pocket. Okay, so then they come out and I don't see any like really big red flags as far as like their facial expressions. I did see like a slight moment where Hannah just kind of looked like, But they're kissing. He gets down on one knee. He proposes. She says yes. And then we get into the discussion where they sit down after he puts on her ring. And Nick is like, way to embarrass me. You're like the same height as me with heels on. And Hannah is like, oh, well, yeah, she just talks about how she was going to maybe wear flats, but decided, you know what, forget it. I'm going to wear heels because I can. So then after this little awkward conversation, we get to another interview where Hannah talks about how she felt about the reveal. And she mentions that, oh, Nick played it like he was this big guy. And I feel like basically she said she feels like that he lied to her. And when I saw this clip, like watching it through for the first time, I really did feel like, oh no, this is definitely not going to work. Anytime on Love is Blind, one of the significant others said like they didn't like how the other one looked, it's like, okay, it's just going to go downhill from here. Like, really, she should have just cut it off right there. I don't know why she didn't. She literally said the worst scenario is that he's like so tiny that I can fit him in my pocket. And Nick, don't get me wrong, he's not super short. He's taller than her when she doesn't have heels on. But you could tell that she was thinking of him in that way. Like, oh my God, he's short. This is the worst thing that can happen to me. And I feel like after that moment, she should have just cut it off. She should have went home. But instead, of course, she didn't. Of course, we know if you watch, Hannah is like the villain of this season to me. She stretches it on with Nick, meets his parents. He meets her parents. He meets her friends. And she consistently tears this man apart despite already knowing his situation. During the time of the airing of the show, Nick still lived with his parents. I'm not sure if he still does, but Hannah was aware of this in the pods before she saw Nick. She was aware of his job and his whole situation. But when we get out in the outside world where they're living together in their apartments, it comes up several times that Hannah feels like Nick is not financially literate and that she has a better hold on finances than he does. She constantly questions him about certain things like, hey, what bills do you pay? And then says like, oh, Nick has never had to pay bills like this before. And basically downs him for things that she already knew about. She consistently nitpicks with him about small things, like, for example, cleaning up. As far as I could see, he didn't really seem like he was a dirty guy, but she talks about, oh, what are you going to do as far as chores? And hey, I don't want to have to ask you to do anything. I want you to just do it. And one of the things I felt was like overly OCD was that she said that she vacuums every single day. And Nick was like, why do you have to vacuum every day? Is it because of your dog? And she's like, no, my dog doesn't even shed. So that was just like a really kind of awkward moment, like a nitpicky moment to me. It was like she was trying to find something wrong with him. And honestly, I think ever since the unveiling where she saw what Nick looked like and wasn't happy about his physical appearance, she was finding things to nitpick with him about. She wanted him to know, look, you're the one that's lucky to be with me, and I'm going to be able to say whatever I want to say because you should just be happy that I chose you. She mentioned several times explicitly that Nick is someone who needs her to build him up. And basically that he's like very immature compared to her, despite her being very immature herself. There were moments in the show where I felt like Hannah could have been a little bit more mature. Like, for example, they had a get together where they had some of the extra pod members come back in, and Nick went off to talk to one of those pod members. It was someone that he was close to at first, but didn't end up matching with. And Hannah handled the situation very immaturely. She was like, why were you over there talking to her for 40 minutes? And I could see if it was a real world situation where you saw next and you were talking to them, but most of the people on Love is Blind know how the whole process works, and they know that, hey, like the producers are going to ask pod members to go and have a conversation with certain people just for the show, to get the clips, to see how people are feeling. And yeah, so Hannah just handled this situation very immaturely. And when they got home from the get together, she decided to start an argument with Nick. There is an episode where Hannah's brother comes to visit, and Hannah is quite disrespectful to Nick in front of her brother, and it also comes off as quite emasculating. There was a scene where Hannah is like, look, we're almost about the same height, or something like she's taller than him. So then Nick is like, no, you're not. And he scoots next to her, and we can clearly see that Nick is a bit taller than Hannah. She's then like, let's check our wingspans. And so then they stretch out their arms to compare. And Hannah has like long nails on. So, I mean, I don't even remember, but I remember her saying like, oh, my wingspan's bigger, and laughing, and her brother's in the background laughing too. And it's kind of an uncomfortable scene because as Hannah jokes around and demeans Nick, Her brother seems very uncomfortable and is like kind of laughing, but at the same time looking like, Hannah, you're taking this too far. Like you could see it in his face. I did go back and rewatch a conversation that Hannah had with Nick when her brother visited. And it was a kind of an awkward situation. So first of all, right when the brother walks in, he asks Nick, how tall are you? And he's like, I'm 5'11". And Hannah's like, no, there's no way you're that tall. So then she's like, Nick's about my height. So then Nick walks over there and stands next to her. And she looks dumb because it's clear that Nick is taller than her. And so she's like, let's check the wingspan. And so they stretched their arms out, and guess what? Her weird self has a larger wingspan than Nick, which to me tells me something's off with you proportionately because he's taller than you. So I don't know, could be off with him too, but that was a little weird. So then after that, they are like talking, and Hannah and Nick are like going at it with each other. And Hannah's complaining about Nick, and she's like, oh, like he left the clothes out on the bed after taking it out in the dryer in the morning. And Nick is like, well, that's what happens when you're unemployed. And Hannah gets a little bit mad, and she's like, oh, well, I make more money than you. And Nick is like, and I love that. He just brushes her off like it's nothing, which he consistently does like the whole season. She's coming at him hard, and he is just like unfazed. Like, he is very emotionally intelligent, which I love about Nick, because I would probably be off the show if I was a guy, because I would probably go and choke the little girl. But anyways, he was like, I love that. That's great. So then later on in the conversation, Nick is like, it's been 2 hours already, and Hannah hasn't said one compliment about me. And they're laughing. The brother's like, yeah, I don't think I can remember anything. Then Hannah goes on to give him a few compliments, and the compliments are that he is patient and that he is handsome, which I think I would agree with both of those things. Also, then Nick goes ahead and gives her some compliments, and he's like, I like how you're confident and how you are able to handle things on your own. He also tells her a few times during this conversation that he just likes how she says it like it is, says what's on her mind, which I think is interesting too. We also get a moment during this conversation where Hannah leaves the room, and Nick has a moment alone to talk to the brother. And the brother is like, just so you know, I'm not offended by that unemployment comment that you told to Hannah, because that's something that Hannah totally would say. And then they get into this whole little conversation about how Hannah tends to say really rude things. And Nick is like, sometimes she takes it too far. And the brother, who doesn't even barely know Nick, he's Hannah's brother, agrees. He's like, yeah, she really does. And that's something that she needs to work on. And I'm like, dang, her own brother is not even like backing her up and saying like lying for her and being like, no, Hannah's not that bad. She's not mean. He's totally sitting there shaking his head agreeing. So this girl, we know, definitely has a problem, because if she's on camera saying these rude, mean things to Nick, just imagine what she says off camera to people. I also didn't mention, before the brother came, there was a conversation about cooking where Nick was asking Hannah about how much water he should put into a pot for some pasta. And Hannah was like, didn't you say you know how to cook? And her tone of voice just really bothered me, because it was like degrading the way that her tone of voice was. And she's like, you've never cooked pasta before? And he's like, oh, well, maybe once. And she makes this face of like this look of like disgust. And I'm like, they both know the cameras are there. And it just seems like Hannah is like doing everything in her power to degrade Nick and make him look bad and make herself look good. In episode 11, we get to a scene where Hannah and Nick are talking, and this is their breakup scene. So Hannah starts out with, in the pause, didn't you tell me you wanted someone that was going to push you? And he's like, yeah. And she was like, do you feel like I've done that? And he was like, yes. And also, let me add this, she has a notebook sitting there. So she's taking notes during this entire conversation. So then going back to the beginning of the season, she had this list of concerns that she left out on a sheet of paper, which was very immature, and it was left there so that Nick could see it. So back to episode 11, breakup scene. She brings up this list and she says that there are 5 concerns that she still has that was on that list. Number 1 is social awareness. Number 2 is ego versus confidence. Number 3 is respect. Number 4 is delusion. And number 5 is maturity. She then goes on to describe a little bit more about each of these things. So she said that he has no respect and no social awareness. Also says that for the ego versus confidence thing, which I didn't completely get, she said that she has to constantly stroke his ego for him to be happy. And he's like, I don't understand. Like, both of them are like, I don't understand. She doesn't understand him, and he doesn't understand why she's just coming with this notebook and writing things down. Nick is like, Hannah, you are just throwing shade and demeaning me, basically expressing that he doesn't like what is going on. And then Hannah's like, what are your responsibilities? And he's like, some responsibilities that I have are taking care of my cat, also taking care of myself and work, and making sure that everyone's okay. And she's like, basically like, what do you take care of? What bills do you pay? And he's like, I pay my car insurance, my car. I don't pay rent because obviously I live with my parents. And I think this part is a little bit funny because it's like, girl, you know he lives with his parents. Girl, you know what he pays for. You're just trying to make him look bad on camera. You're just asking these questions so the cameras capture exactly what it is that you don't like about Nick. So then he says also too, part of my job is being the best friend and best son that I can be, and improving myself on being, he's a real estate agent, so improving myself in my job. Hannah basically continues to question him, basically making it clear that she is not happy about the responsibilities that he currently has. But it's like, girl, you knew this since you met him in the pods. You knew that he lived with his parents. You knew that he didn't have a lot of bills that he was responsible for. But now you're treating it like this is just something that's brand new that you're learning. It's like, what did you expect? You expected Nick within these 5 to 8, however many weeks of the experiment to go and get a whole new job, get an apartment, and basically just change his whole life that quick because he's marrying you. Girl, you knew exactly the situation, and now you're trying to make him look bad, but you're making yourself look dumb as well. Hannah reveals to the cameras that Nick had said that he wanted to come up with a plan on how they were going to break up. He knew that they were going to break up. Apparently, she had called him and said, hey, I'm not going through with trying on the dresses because basically I do not feel like I want to marry you at this moment. And I don't want to go through with something that I'm unsure about, something that's not genuine. Which I don't completely blame him for that. Like, this is something that everyone's going to see. People you work with, your friends, your family, and you don't want to look messy. So I don't think that Nick was completely wrong for this. I think that Hannah was wrong for revealing that they had that conversation because it's like, girl, again, you were trying to make Nick look bad and you're the one that looks bad. So after she called him, he was like, let's come up with a plan because he basically didn't want to look bad in front of his friends and family on television. This scene comes to a close with Hannah saying, we are not getting married, and asking Nick, how does that make you feel? Nick says that it's the worst feeling ever because he did plan on going through the whole process and making it to the altar, and he did feel like he was going to say yes to Hannah. He wanted their relationship to work. In individual interviews, Hannah says she felt like she didn't really know who Nick was, and she felt like maybe he was not who he portrayed himself to be. In Nick's interview, he says that he came onto the show to go through with the whole experiment and that he was genuine and that he was not on there for television, pretty much. All right, so let's get into my final thoughts about Nick and Hannah. I, first of all, will say I do not blame a woman for not wanting to be with a man who doesn't have his own place and who doesn't pay a lot of bills or have their own responsibilities. One thing I didn't mention, Nick even said, I think he was still on his parents' phone plan, which at 28, I feel like that is a lot. Now, in this economy, yes, some people are having to stay home with their parents. They're saving up money. And once they save up their money, they're going to be doing better than some of us who just went out on our own to start with and started from scratch. So yeah, with that being said, I mean, I myself would want to be with someone who has experience with taking care of a household, with taking care of bills, taxes, things like that. Someone who is financially literate. So I don't blame any woman for not wanting a guy like Nick. But I really do blame Hannah for this whole thing, because she can't put this on Nick. She chose to be with Nick. She knew his status. She knew that she had more experience with certain life things than he did as an adult, more experience with adulting, and she still chose him. Why? Because Hannah was more dead set on the fact that Nick was a guy who had played football, that he was a kicker, and in her mind, she had this imaginary guy who was tall, muscular, and very nice looking. And for her, that was more important than a guy who is financially stable and financially literate. And she probably will not admit this, but it's just the truth. We literally saw this play out. When he was not physically what she expected, this is when she really started demeaning him and putting him down. When it comes to Nick, I will say Hannah might be right about one thing, which is the confidence, because Nick consistently let Hannah put him down, and he continued on to stay in the experiment. Why? I don't know. Maybe he did want to be on the cameras. Maybe he felt like he had to go through with the whole process. Who knows what it was? But he did appear to be lacking confidence. The way that he consistently let Hannah disrespect him and continued on to act like he was going to stay in the relationship. I really would like to know what Nick's thinking was about with coming on this experiment, because he really doesn't come across as someone that was ready for marriage, as far as still living with his parents, not having a lot of life experience, being out on his own, and then also not even being financially ready to get married, it seemed, because it sounded like he was still trying to get his real estate business off the ground. And a lot of times when people go into real estate, they are doing that as a side job and not a main job, because you're not going to get a lot of money in that business until you've had like a lot of exposure and become someone who's a really popular realtor. So I'm wondering why he even came on the show. Did he think like, oh, this is my chance to leave my parents' home and start my own family? Or was he looking at it as an opportunity to gain some more money? I don't know. But what I do know is that this couple was definitely not a match in heaven. This was a horrible matchup, and they really should have just ended it in the pods. There were a lot of red flags going on, and even the women who were in the pods were saying, like, Nikki D, really kind of joking that Hannah was really becoming attached to him. And I remember the men in the pods were talking about Hannah and how down to earth she seemed and how she seemed different than a lot of other women that they dated. They almost portrayed her as like they knew that she was not going to be like a dime, like a 10 out of 10, but that she had a decent personality. And I do think that Hannah has her own unique personality, that she can be funny at times, but I don't think that she like showed this mean streak that she had like in the pods. I really feel like she played it really cool and was, joking around a lot and came across as kind of like an ideal fun girl. But in the real world, she was not that girl. Had she have shown this mean streak while she was in the pods, I don't even think she would have been chosen by anyone. Anyways, I can't wait to see the reunion and what Nick and Hannah have to say. I do think both of them are probably going to show up. I know like when things end bad, there are situations where certain people don't show up because it was just such a huge breakup. But I do think these two are going to be there, and I'm excited to hear what they have to say. There are images of Hannah going around. I think she's lost around, they said 70 pounds, and she does look great. But girl, the weight was not the thing that we were talking about with you. It was your attitude. It was your rude personality. And just because you lost a little weight doesn't mean we have changed our minds about you. You need to get it together. Like, girl, you need to go and get some therapy, and you need to eat some humble pie, okay? Anyways, thanks for tuning in to this That's So Ray review. If you like this review, go ahead and hit the like button, comment below, and subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to hit 100 subscribers by the end of the month. See ya!